Should I invite you?
That's okay.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry. Everyone here?
There's one more.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. And thank you for joining focus session number 1, Data to Deal, a partnership for catalyzing transport decarbonization finance. This is a program that ADB is collaborating with the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, FCDO, as well as the Climate Compatible Growth Program, CCG. And the main purpose of this Data to Deal is looking at how we can get knowledge and innovation and build that capacity to support broad transport decarbonization across all different modes. The Data to Deal part demonstrates how we must understand what's happening and how we can model those impacts and see where those implementation of various options that are presented from better data, modeling of the impacts, modeling of the finance required, how best to implement those so actions are actually taken. So it's a whole process, but I will allow the esteemed speakers to go into a lot more detail on that. But it really will support ideas, concepts based on solid data, better informed decision making, how to implement those results so we do see broader transport decarbonization through this model. And part of that, I'm pleased to announce the launch today of the coordination mechanism for scaling sustainable transport investment in Asia and the Pacific. So one of the big announcements of this week is to look at this, the data to deal, and how we can build up this coordination mechanism. We heard on the opening day, the launch of the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport, and this is very much aligned with that decade, particularly when we're looking at decarbonization of the transport sector. The coordination mechanism it's a global effort. We're bringing as many partners from across the region, yes, Asia and the Pacific, but looking globally as well. But there's great lessons to be learned from other regions and how we can share that knowledge, share that expertise and information, but above all else, collaborate on the actions that need to be taken. And the governments will be responsible for delivering this program, so build up the institutional capacity, build up that knowledge within the governments and support them through this coordination mechanism. Ultimately, to have those investments so the impacts on the ground are felt. Better transport system, decarbonisation of the transport network. It is a voluntary platform. We're not going to find an answer or a solution within the next 6 months or 1 year. It is a long-term program, but we're starting and making sure that we set those decisions that are taken and the policies and the plans that are set out now. They're based on very good data, very good decision-making, and evidence from the modelling on what the impacts would be and how best to implement those. So it's a long-term engagement to ensure that we can see things through from the planning stage, the information, the capacity stage, through to the delivery. It is the launch today, so we would very much welcome your support as well as your suggestions. So please, we're now into the sort of deeper dive part of the ADB Transport Forum. So while we have a lot of esteemed panelists to share more information about this, please do ask us questions. What is in it for you? How can you get involved? Questions and clarifications on the data to deal and the coordination mechanism as well. And with that, I wish you all the best, and please be interactive. Please take these learnings away and see how we can implement that at the local level in your respective countries. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Jamie, so much for setting the scene very nicely on this topic. So we are very excited about the launch of the coordination mechanism, and you will hear more about the coordination mechanism during this session. Bert will be explaining a bit more about what it is about. But to set the scene further and to tell you a bit more about what the data to deal approach actually is about, we'll start with our first presentation of today, which is an introduction of the data to deal approach. And that is, as Jamie well said, is a framework that helps countries translate data modeling and climate targets into policies, investment plans, and financing pipelines. So our next presenter is Professor Mark Howells, Director of Climate Compatible Growth in the UK. So Mark, the floor is yours.
So a very good morning to everybody. Just trying to change slides, so if you could. Climate Compatible Growth is a UK aid funded program. We get most of our funding from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. We're set up with a number of universities, including Oxford, Cambridge, UCL, Imperial, and others. My name is Mark Howells, and I direct the program. We have the privilege of working with a number of international organizations and a number of country governments, and very proud to be associated with and working with the Asian Development Bank. I want to talk a little bit about data to deal in this presentation. What we're very interested in is how do we make sure that the large amount of concessionary finance that is available is channeled to where it's needed, and governments know how to access that finance. The data to deal approach has been developed with some 30 international organizations. I see colleagues from WRI, ADB, World Bank, African Development Bank, and a number of others. And we put this together so that countries have a blueprint for how to mobilize large quantities of finance fast. The mission statements of climate compatible growth is to help countries mobilize breakthrough levels of finance to accelerate economic growth in a way that's lower carbon. So we started this off several years ago working with the government of Costa Rica. And over the period of, a short period, it was about 2 years, in an engagement project that did not cost a lot, we managed to work with the government to mobilize something like $2.4 billion. Since then, this has been rolled out in other Latin American countries with the Inter-American Development Bank, and we've mobilized over $11 billion. And we're looking at expanding this and creating something that is easily accessible to countries across the world, including a special focus in this effort with Asia. This continues to mobilize funding and is being used in lots of different settings. So right at the bottom here was something that was announced recently, which was the Climate Investment Funds in the Dominican Republic mobilizing funding. So to put this into a little bit of context, we have the climate change meeting coming up soon, the COP. We hear that there's a large amount of funding that's available for concessionary finance, loans for deals, and so on. Multi-billion-dollar funds on the one hand. On the other, we have countries that have really deep investment needs. And there's a big gap bridging these two at the moment. And part of the reason for that gap is because things are speculative. So just imagine the story. An environment ministry, that's normally the ministry that fronts for the governments at the COP, might think to itself, we want to produce a bunch of nationally determined contributions or efforts that are going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and we've heard there's financing for them. So just imagine this country, it goes there. It's heard that there's funding available, but it doesn't really know how much and what's required to pull this together. So it's a bit speculative in its NDC process, and it thinks, I've heard that in the transport sector, it would be good to have more buses, maybe to electrify some of them, change some of the roads so that they can cope with them and do some, set the system up properly. We could probably invest in some solar and wind, and maybe we could set something up with vehicle-to-grid charging. We've heard that this is interesting. And we've got a lot of hydropower, so maybe we can develop some of our hydropower systems. And with all of these renewables, what's going to happen is you're going to reduce the amount of fossil fuels that you burn, and so you reduce emissions. And you're going to be able to do something good with the transport, at least. So it's the case that this sounds interesting, but as soon as you go to funders, there'll be a problem with this particular scenario. And this is a very typical scenario, by the way. The funders will look at this and they'll say, okay, this is what the Environment Ministry says, but what does the Transport Ministry say? The Transport Ministry responds to this NDC document and says, well, this is great, but it doesn't really match up with our mobility plans looking into the future. And, we've had no discussion about bus or fleet ownership models and what needs to be done to the roads to accommodate this new system. So here's a red flag. All of a sudden, the funders see, whoa, one ministry doesn't agree with another ministry. This makes me reluctant to spend my money or to invest it. Then you go to the Energy Ministry, and the Energy Ministry looks at this and says, well, okay, this is great, but you've got nothing here about where you're going to be fitting the chargers, what kind of business models you need around the chargers, how you're going to strengthen the transmission system, what kind of market you're going to put in place to get us more IPPs for solar and wind, and how you're going to balance this grid to make sure that it's stable. Again, and the Energy Ministry is typically a powerful ministry in many governments. The funders will look at this and say, whoa, hang on, we have another ministry that doesn't agree. And then you go to the Finance Ministry. The Finance Ministry looks at this thing and says, wait, so you want to move people from using cars and lots of gasoline and petrol, diesel, and so on into these electric buses. but I get something like 20 to 30% of my revenue by taxing gasoline, petrol, diesel, and you're telling me that I'm going to have to give that up. And now there's another ministry that says, I'm not sure I agree with these plans. And bear in mind that the finance ministry holds the bilateral relationships with all of the large funds. So immediately, again, another red flag, and a very big red flag for the funds. Now, the funds will look at the country, they'll look at the NDCs, and they see problems with everything, apart from maybe the hydropower system. Because the country's been building hydropower in the past, they understand the market system and so on. And so there's a lot of funding. There's a lot of very soft concessionary funding. This all gets crammed into one project, a project that could probably fly on its own merit anyway. So it's the case that we've lost the potential there. So Data to Deal is a system that's been set up to overcome this. You'll find the guidance documents online. As I said, these have been put together by some 30 international organizations, and we're very happy to work with others and governments and learn more. And there are several components we have in place to overcome these problems. The first is that we figure out exactly how much finance is available to a government. And so on, and we have to garner high-level political support. It's critical that planning processes between ministries can be harmonized. So that's the first step. The second step is that we have to develop institutional capacity in order to carry this out. In the example I gave, in many instances, these NDCs will be developed by an external consultant. They fly in, they develop the plans, they fly out, and so on. But to do this sensibly and sustainably, it's the case that the institutions in government that are going to be responsible for creating the whole of government cost-benefit analysis can own and undertake the analysis into the future. Component number 3, we start off aligning a development vision. So just at a very high level, it's the case that we need to make sure that the Transport Ministry's plans are properly reflected in those NDCs in the Environment Ministry's work, which then flow through sensibly to the Energy Ministry and then move on to the Finance Ministry to make sure that there's broad agreement. After the broad agreement, it's then critical to go in to crunch the numbers. No funder will release funds unless there's a detailed cost-benefit analysis that's been developed. And in this case, with transport, it's important that that cost-benefit analysis is undertaken across government. So there must be a mandate, for example, for the Transport Ministry to produce and to understand what data is needed to go to the Environment Ministry, likewise to the Energy Ministry, and to the Finance Ministry, and so on. And this has to be done against the backdrop of just some careful stakeholder coordination. All of the ministries involved have got different objectives. And that's great. You need ministries with different objectives because, you know, by delineating things we can deliver. But in this case, it's important that we bridge some of the boundaries that naturally exist. Component number 6 then goes to, okay, if we've developed our models and we understand, for example, how much energy needs to go into the charging systems, how much investment needs to go into the transmission system, how much investment and operating money needs to go into the development of solar, wind, and hydro. Once we've figured all of those out, we then need to look at the enabling environment to make sure that these fit. Do we have a fleet ownership model? Can we create the right kind of charging system for the chargers? Do we have wheeling chargers set up for the transmission system? Have we got power purchase agreements and auctions in place for the new solar and wind plants or not? So then we work on this enabling environment. And finally, we have a look at finally, we have a look at the financing strategies. Now, the thing for the financiers, which is interesting now, is instead of having go one step back, by the way, just with the modeling that's important. So apart from having made sure that the system works together sensibly, we can now go to the Finance Ministry and point out that yes, there's less oil and gas that's being used in the vehicles in the country. That does mean less revenue, but you're not importing as much oil and gas as you were before, which then means that you've got more money circulating across and internal to the economy. So you can change your tax base. So it's the case that you can think about shifting from taxing oil to taxing other things, so it becomes fiscally feasible. So now with the finance strategy, the financiers can have a look at this and they can say, well, hang on, instead of just the hydropower system, we've got other things we can invest in because they've set this up properly. We've got the bus fleet that we can invest in. We've got the charging infrastructure. We have the transmission infrastructure. We have the solar and we have the wind as well as the hydro. So now there's a portfolio of projects and perhaps some civils that need to go together with the charging infrastructure to make sure that the buses and the system work sensibly. Now, if we have a look at the different types of funds that are available, we have this tool that helps countries understand what components is grant versus what components is, just a loan with standard conditions. And then we can optimize this. We can think about where to put our grant financing into things that are often quite difficult to pay for, perhaps some of the roads and some of the charging and transmission infrastructure. And that frees up other parts of the system that you can then put more harder funding into. So it's the case that you optimize your system. You have more projects, so not just the hydropower project. You have a whole larger portfolio to invest in. You have more money coming into the system. And you've also leveraged the money that you have sensibly. So the grant funding levers more funding in the end. So instead of having, as in our original story, a set of projects that were not coherent across government organs, it's now policy coherent. Previously, these were not fiscally feasible. The Finance Ministry wasn't happy with the tax shuffling. Now it's happy with the tax shuffling. And now they're financially viable because you've done the finance strategy in a way that the whole system results in a set of investments that are feasible, which is the kind of thing that we want to be able to take forward. If things are policy coherent, fiscally feasible, and financially viable, those are the things that will attract finance. And without a data-to-deal type approach, it's very difficult to do that across countries. If you would like to get a hold of these briefs, we launched them at the last COP. We're supporting the government of Turkey at the moment with the next COP, who are using this in the background to do some of their analytics. Please do go online and download the briefs from our website. Thank you very much for your attention, but I'd also like to thank all of the organizations that have been involved in putting this together. CCG is just one of the 30 that I mentioned earlier on. So thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing this. It's really exciting to hear about, always to hear about these examples from Costa Rica and other countries on really mobilizing large amounts of funds through this quite structured approach. So we will continue exploring how this approach could be applied to the transport sector in Asia and the Pacific. And we'll hear more about Mark in our panel that will take place after a couple of presentations still. So we'll have him back on stage soon. But moving before the panel, we'll still have a couple of presentations. So our next speaker is Sudhir Gota. He's co-team leader of the Asian Transport Observatory, and he'll present findings from a regional assessment of transport investment needs and introduce a new interactive tool on IFI financing for the transport sector. So over to you, Sudhir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. To continue with what Mark was saying, a living example of data to deals would be Asian Transport Observatory. We collect about 500 indicators at the national level, and we try to translate these indicators into insights, policies, ultimately the investments. So today what I'm going to do is the trillion-dollar question. The most important question across all the rooms probably is, where is the money coming from? And what are we seeing? So what we did was we released a transport outlook yesterday. This is the 2035 transport outlook. ATO predominantly looks at history and it tries to understand what is the current status. So in order to, for this particular presentation also, I went back to the first transport forum, 2008. This is the 10th transport forum. So first Transport Forum, what were the conversations like? And what I found was the minutes of meeting. And what you will see is the infrastructure investment needs. In 2008, we assessed that over the next 12 years, we would need 2 to 3 trillion total. This is about, this is about 200 to 300 billion per year. This is 2008. We missed the entire infrastructure leap, what happened after the global financial crisis, where China, India picked up the infrastructure, Indonesia, many countries actually started building a lot of infrastructure. And there were conversations from ADB saying that we want to become the 1% of the total infrastructure lending could come from ADB. I'll tell you how much is the number, the latest number, what we see now. So what is the outlook looks like for us? So we collect a lot of information. So when we say that 2.6 trillion is the annual infrastructure investments in Asia, this doesn't mean that this is the need for the countries. See, this, what we are saying is these are the current pipelines. We consider three important things. Historic construction rates, what does it suggest? What does the current policy target? And we combine it with the current projects in pipeline. These three things. How fast have been constructing? Where are we in terms of socioeconomic development? What does the policy target translate into? And what would happen based on all these transitions, what we see in terms of the total numbers. So this is not what countries need, probably more. But 2.6 trillion is what we are seeing based on the current projects in pipeline at the regional level annually for the low and middle income countries. We are not even adding the high income countries. So this is 2.3% of the GDP. 2.3% of the GDP. We looked at 8 subsectors, looking at roads, looking at different categories of roads. We looked at high-speed rail, urban transit, all 3 categories, metro, LRT, BRT. And we also looked into high-speed rail, ports, airports, and electric mobility. And we look at both construction and maintenance in terms of the infrastructure. And this is 3 times higher than what Asia has spent, or 2 times higher than what Asia has spent over the last 10 years. This is twice or thrice compared to 2000 to 2020, how much we spent. Now we are going to spend 3 times more, 2.6 trillion every year. This is based on the current construction rates, based on the current pipelines. But what does it mean? Even if we spend that money, we will never be able to close the infrastructure gap. If you look at per capita levels, if you consider your countries and you compare with high-income countries in Asia, I'm not even talking about Europe, I'm not even talking about other regions. Currently, the per capita rates, the infrastructure gap is between 3 to 9 times for different kind of modes. If you look at ports, 9 times lower than high-income countries. If you talk about roads, this is 3 times lower. So there is a great infrastructure gap. And our finding says that we will not be able to close the infrastructure gap. We are actually building infrastructure over the next 10 years, less infrastructure, what we built since the Sustainable Development Goals came in. Since 2015 to 2025, 2025 to 2035, we are going to build 600,000 kilometers of infrastructure lower. But then the question you should be asking is, if we are building less kilometers of infrastructure, why are we spending more? The thing is, because of the inflation, because of the cost of construction, the cost of construction is actually doubling from 4 million kilometers to about 8 million kilometers. Many countries are in the tipping point where the costs are increasing, the inflation is higher. The kind of infrastructure what we are going to build is very different. And you see that the reduction is mainly on the urban transit, high-speed rail lines. These are very costly to build. If we are going to build higher, the numbers will increase further. So what we are seeing is post-COVID, the infrastructure pipelines are actually reducing. And this is a danger sign because of the debt levels, because of the post-pandemic crisis, many countries are not able to pick up the infrastructure at the rate which they thought they could be picking up. And this is one of the stories what we see from the outlook. So where is this money going? 60% of it to the roads. We assess about road safety about 2%, ports about 3%, about electric mobility infrastructure is about 120 billion per year. This is about 4%, airports, high-speed rail, urban rapid transit, heavy rail. So we are saying that 60% of the money will probably go to the roads, 40% to the other modes, and it would be significant change compared to what we have seen in the past. But this is going to become very, very difficult. Where is countries, if the pipeline is shrinking, where will the country find the money for investing in those kind of modes? So this is 2.6 trillion every year, and you need to spend about 3%, 70 billion on the ports, 120 billion every year on the electric mobility infrastructure. So these are the challenges. And the infrastructure demand and the investment demand will be very different across regions, across countries. You can see some variation here, but one of the most interesting sides would be this figure compared to this figure. What we have seen over a period of time, if you go back to the opening remarks by Hideaki, he mentioned that ADB pipeline has changed. Yes, ADB pipeline has changed. The entire infrastructure investment pipeline has changed compared to 2010 to 2010 to from what we are seeing now. Predominantly, we were investing on roads. The road segment has reduced. Alternate modes have come in. And this is what we see for the 2025 to 2035 period. And the Pacific countries will be building a very different kind of infrastructure compared to some of the Central Asian countries, some of the other countries. One of the conversations what we had in 2008 was the motorization. And we said that vehicles are growing about 8 to 10% every year. What we see that the motorization rates are also slowing down. We are now constructing about, the vehicle increase is about 3% over the next 10 decades. But the kind of motorization what we are seeing is very different. We are seeing electric motorization now. When I say electric motorization is in the next decade, if the countries meet the target what they have set, most of the countries in Asia have established electric mobility targets. If they meet those targets, what you will see is the decline in the ICE vehicles, and you will see a rapid increase. Over the next 10 years, 545 million electric vehicles will be registered on the roads. 545 million. It means more than 500 charging points. It means money for the charging points. These are the costs what we see down the line. But overall, now coming back to the question, which was, I think, started by Jamie, like the coordinating mechanism. Why do you need a coordinating mechanism for this? What is the role of the development aid? Development aid at this point of time is about 0.7%. Only 0.7% of the total infrastructure investments which has happened since 2015 to 2024, 2025. So if you count all the donors, the bilateral, the multilateral, it is about, we have about 18.7 billion, 18 billion, 0.7% of the total infrastructure investment needs between 2015 to 2023. PPPs have provided about 28.8 billion. And we see some bad news. So in order to come up with these numbers, we started looking at the development finance. So I will go to that particular database. But before that, I want to tell you one of the main stories what we see. The PPP projects have shrunk significantly. We see a significant reduction in PPP post-COVID. So if you see the figure on the right, you will see that between 2015 to 2019, we had about 180 billion of PPP projects in Asia. This 180 billion has become 80 billion from 2020 to 2024. Same time period, from 180 billion to about 80 billion. 75% of this money has gone to two countries, only two countries. So imagine the kind of challenge what you see, that the money which is coming from the PPPs have shrinked. The development assistance is a drop in the ocean. It is only about 0.7%. Now, let me go back to ADB, the first thing which I started, saying that ADB wants to become 1% of the total infrastructure investment needs. Currently, last year, ADB did about 5 billion portfolio, and it was only about 0.2%. 0.2% of the total infrastructure investment need. So these are the kind of challenges what you see. And this is why a coordinating mechanism is required, because the investment needs are high. The modalities what we have is only few. So in comparison, because Mark mentioned about fuel taxes, the fuel subsidies, 50 billion what we saw. In 2024, it was 100 billion, the fossil fuel subsidies directly provided by the countries. So we have launched this Development Finance Explorer. Now, what does it have is about 77,000 project entries there, 77,000. We have identified which country has provided money, which donor, 66 donors we have identified, where this money is going to, what kind of mode, what kind of externalities does it address. You can find this in our website, Asian Transport Observatory. You need to go to the Insight section. In case you find it difficult, please come to our booth and we will be showcasing it for your country. What kind of assistance has been provided in the past over the last 50 years? Last 50 years. This database tells us many interesting insights. And I think because the panel discussion is next, I will tell 2 or 3 main stories what we see. The first one is, okay, this is how the dashboard looks like. Have a look at the dashboard, select a particular country. You can see which countries have donated or which countries have provided funds to your country and in what modes. You can see the entire numbers in this particular database. This is free. You can actually use it and it is very usable. So the first lesson what we learned when we looked at past 50 years of development finance was, this is not only a drop in ocean, what we are seeing is that development finance is getting concentrated. And this is, I think, compared to the PPPs, where I saw that PPPs have shrinked, even the development aid, even though it is going to only about few countries. So the 9 countries, if I combine 9 countries, and I see the percentages, over the last decade, it was about 78%. Now, post-COVID, only about 84% of the total development assistance has gone to 9 countries, from 78% to about 84%. Between 2010 to 2020, this was about 74%. So what we are saying is a shift from 74% to 84%. That's a very significant shift. So the point is the development finance is going to the countries which is not going to the countries probably which has the greatest demand, but for the countries which can absorb it. And we see that thinning of the pipeline. The next argument is we shift in the funding focus. So in first transport forum, 50% of the development aid was going to the roads. Now this is less than 38%. So you see now development aid is predominantly going towards rail and other modes, not to the roads. So roads has shrinked this, and accordingly you can see the importance of ADB's pipeline. ADB's pipeline has shifted. You can see the ripple effect on the development financing. The third thing what we saw was grants. Mark mentioned grants. The grants have actually gone down. The loans have increased. The concessionary loans have increased. And you can see which UN decade theme these kind of investments have gone, predominantly towards low carbon transport, significantly lower towards road safety, significantly lower towards access, improving access. So these are some kind of storylines what you see from the development. Please do use it because we have spent a lot of time trying to analyze 77,000 entries. These are very useful for you. The best example, let's talk about electric mobility. Now, if you look at the policies, all countries, all countries, you will see that electric mobility strategies are the biggest policy priority. How much of development finance is going towards electric mobility? 1.75%. 1.75% over the last period of time. We were shocked with the number, so we decided to validate it. How we did was we collected all the BTRs, the countries submit to the UNFCCC. If you look at that BTRs also, total money is about 11.2 billion, 2%. Only 2% of money has gone to the electric mobility. The policy priority is the topmost. The amount of money which has gone is only about 1.75%. So these are the kind of stories which you will find for these for your countries. Please do access this. ATO, you please ask us about these kind of insights. We will be happy to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhir, so much for this really fascinating presentation and for highlighting the really the scale, the enormous scale of the investment needs, and also for sharing us the development financing explorer. I think those insights were really really fascinating. What struck me was really this concentration and increasing concentration of funding to specific countries. So thanks so much for sharing this, and I will certainly explore this further, looking at the tool. So before moving to the panel, we have our next speaker, Bert Fabian. He's Senior Transport Specialist at ADB. He'll provide us a bit more information about this newly launched coordination mechanism for scaling sustainable transport investment in Asia and the Pacific that Jamie earlier launched. And Bert will also be moderating the next panel, so he will be staying on stage after that. So over to you, Bert.
Thank you very much, Johanna. I think those were very insightful presentations from Mark and Sudhir. Many of those information probably are just buried in reports, but thankfully, through ATO, you have distilled some of this information. These are very important. And that's one of the reasons why we have, through the support of CCG, UKFCDO, have looked at applying data to deal in a few countries in Asia, developing member countries of ADB, but also establishing or starting some kind of coordination among development partners. You heard about those 10 countries where financing goes to, and I think it's probably right. It's not the demand. Maybe those are the countries that are most ready because they have undergone this process of the D2D approach that we heard from Mark, where you have the data, there was modeling, political support, some financing strategy. That's probably why the funders decided, okay, let's put the money here. But also, the speakers were also right to say that that's where probably it's easy to give the money. But it's also important to give the money and funding to the countries that are developing and deciding where urbanization, transport infrastructure investments will go. And we know that there are many multilateral development banks, bilateral banks, development institutions who are supporting countries. And sometimes maybe they don't know what the other country development institutions have already done, or other development organizations. Hence, we would like to initiate the start of this coordination mechanism. You've heard many times about this decade of sustainable transport. And this initiative, we aim to support the implementation of the decade of sustainable transport, perhaps more so for the individual countries, where we hope to support greater investment in sustainable transport, getting partnerships among the development banks, but also other development institutions. We will coordinate more with the MDBs and bilateral development banks in the forum and other development institutions throughout the rest of the day, and we hope to follow up on this coordination mechanism. I don't have a lot of slide or explanation on this coordination mechanism because we also don't want to make it rigid. Perhaps many of us have worked in this field for a long time, and many institutions have started doing coordination mechanisms, partnerships, etc. So we hope that we just initiate this and work with the other organizations so that we can also foster long-term partnership among them and follow up on the implementation of the decade of sustainable transport, translating this into the actions in the developing member countries, particularly in this region. So thank you. That's just a few words, few slides on this coordination mechanism. But again, going back to the presentations, the two presentations this morning, I think now if we pause and think about how this applies to the institutions, the development institutions, but also to the countries. And we are fortunate to have our panels for today who will be representing many of the stakeholders that are involved. First and foremost, we have Mr. Solomon Pela. He is the first Assistant Secretary to the Department of National Works and Highways. So his main task is really road planning and network development. So he's the person who has to lead his country and also other stakeholders in planning for this. And I'm sure he is also the one that is looking for the funds, but not only himself. Sir, please, if you can join us on stage. Next, we have Dr. Catherine Luga. She is the Section Chief in the Transport Division in ESCAP. The ESCAP is the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia Pacific. And this is the main body in Asia that looks at that works with our governments to have the agreements, know more about what's happening in terms of policies. And we will need them in order to work with our countries, establish those enabling environments. So please, Ms. Catherine. Next, we have Mr. Arun Zie from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. He is developing and managing high-quality, big mega projects on transport. So he's on the field. He knows what are needed in order to support those proposals that our countries pose to development institutions, and he will be able to tell us more about those challenges. Mr. Runze. Next, we have our colleague, Diana Hernandez Luis. She is working with our group, the Emerging Area in the Transport Sector Office. She has been with us with ADB for quite some time. She did her master's in the University of Manchester. But I think the important thing is she's leading many of our capacity building initiatives with developing member countries. And when we say capacity building, I think it's also understanding what the needs are. And we will hear more of that later from Diana. So we have, last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Felipe Ramirez of the World Resources Institute Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. He was the former Secretary of Mobility of Bogota and former CEO of Transmilenio. 25 years ago, we were already studying Transmilenio, and we've heard a lot about this from our good friend Dario Hidalgo. It was the first transport project that benefited from climate change. It's the first CDM transport project. And I'm sure many of us would like to visit Bogota one of these days. Felipe, thank you. Sorry, maybe this time we would also like to ask Mark to join us on stage, please. We've heard more about the CCG, but I'm sure there will be other questions later on the CCG and how we can work together better. Okay, we have about 45 minutes. We have a few questions. We will try to distill many of these questions and really get more of from you in terms of how the data to deal, how looking at understanding the problem, collating data, getting the political support, getting buy-in from stakeholders, not only from one institution, but from other government institutions, and up to getting the implementation of these projects. For the first round of questions, I would like to start with Mr. Solomon. From your experience, but also from the perspective of PNG, we already heard the remarks of your colleague in the plenary where you were asking for, can we get lower concessional rates or interest rates from development projects? I know where that's coming from, but we also heard from Sudhir in terms of how much the money is available, where it is coming from, where it's going to. So now, from your experience, maybe if you can tell us more about the challenges in the development of these policies, low carbon transport policies in your region, and also the main difficulty in accessing finance for implementation. Sir, please, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Firstly, let me just say, for the last few days, it has been an amazing experience to partake in this forum and listen to wonderful speakers and panelist members sitting up in front and sharing a lot of very important experiences from their countries. And in a way, it's helping us also learn from them, plus they also learn from us. So thank you, ADB, for facilitating this. Let me just also acknowledge my two senior bosses, if I may, my secretary, Mr. Gibson Olemba, and Secretary Wawani, so Secretary for Transport, was very, very frank in his presentation on Tuesday. He was straight to the point. I want you to lower the rates of the concessional loans. So I bet that's probably one of the things behind the idea to come and see how we can benefit more from ADB. But let me just probably give just a kind of a background into understanding what Papua New Guinea is like in terms of, now from what we have come to where we are now. PNG, more to say in a cultural perspective, insofar as decarbonization is concerned. We're a country that is slowly transitioning from a middle-income country, trying to get into what the rest of the world is going. Many of our people, or even the country as a whole, we depend so much on hydrocarbon fuels, as is many developing countries. And it's not that easy to completely transition from usage of that energy to what the world is pushing towards, which is decarbonization. And largely because many of our people are so dependent on the land. Transportation connectivity too is not that many in terms of having accessibility to vehicles and such. And so people do not see the need so much in that space. And so decarbonization has not been an issue in our country until such that now the UN is pushing and the whole world is pushing, and we find ourselves in a position that we need to now start developing policies, frameworks and legislation in place to start seeing how best we can go with the rest of the world. I think one of the challenges, Bert, if I may put it straight, is that for a country like PNG, and I believe many other countries in the Pacific, is looking at the infrastructure. We can put a policy in to try to see, to meet up to the aspirations of the UN goals. But in terms of matters like infrastructure, charging stations, having the capacity within the departments, within our organizations to manage that, the import of vehicles coming to the country, those are things that we have to look at. So we have got some few EVs in the vehicle, in the country right now, but the challenge is, can we sustain it? Do we have the opportunity to access funds through Green Climate Fund, Green Energy Fund, to start to build these capacities in the country? And I think what we can focus more on is ADB and the development partners helping us to develop our capacities. That's the first thing that we can do. Assist the different organizations, particularly transport and works in our country, to look at the areas of technical assistance, developing the policy platform and framework, and seeing how we can prosper in that particular space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. One of the reasons why we have invited PNG for the panel is they are one of the selected developing member countries of ADB where we would like to apply the D2D approach. So we have a few countries, and we are coordinating with our colleagues who are leading transport projects in PNG, and we would like to see how we can further support you on this. We will get back to you, sir, for more questions. For our colleague, Mr. Runzie, we heard about those difficulties in funding. And we also you saw that ADB, World Bank, AIIB are cooperating in a major project, rail project in Turkey. So they are combining resources. We will see more of this if we want to pursue more transport projects in each country. I also discovered, and maybe on hindsight, this is well known to everyone, our countries, the developing member countries, have debt exposure limits per development bank. So we can only borrow as much from ADB, World Bank, others. So we are limited. So even if AIIB can give more money to one country, they cannot, because there are limits, these debt exposure limits. Hence, we work together more. But Mr. Runze is also with us so that he can tell us more about the difficulties, the challenges, and other barriers in financing low-carbon transport projects coming from the person really developing such projects. Mr. Runze, please.
Thank you so much, Bert. Thank you again for inviting me to this forum. This is my first time to this forum. I have to say I'm very, very impressed, especially that the fact that you are bringing all of our shared clients to Manila, and we can discuss for a whole week about the very important issues in our sector. However, even though this is a transport forum, I believe we have reached a consensus that transport has become super interdisciplinary especially when we are talking about electrification of mobility. We are essentially talking about energy infrastructure as well. So that comes to my first point, also echoing on this coordination at the government side, it's a coordination among ministries. At the MDB side, we have to also break the silos of the transport sector, and we have to collaborate with our colleagues from other sectors as well. And I believe different banks, they have different solutions. For ADB, you have those residence missions. You have country directors, representatives to coordinate. At AIB, we recently established this country focal system, which is like one dedicated person as a single interface to the government, to different ministries. So that would be number one, to tackle the challenges among different sectors. The second is still the insufficient of data for decision making. And this is also, I think, there will be a great potential for D2D initiatives. As a transport specialist, as an engineer, I think the first question we are going to ask whenever we are approached by any project is, where is your traffic? What is your demand, right? And nowadays, I think all the MDBs are actually seeing a new narrative in transportation infrastructure in a world with more tensions and conflicts, that more and more countries are trying to add resilience or redundancy in their supply chain, in their transport system. But this would also require a higher level of complexity of decision making. We need more data, for example, about the trade. Lots of people are talking about Middle Corridor, and of course, Central Asia and South Caucasus is the region I've been focusing for the past 7-8 years. And we are still have very limited knowledge about, how the trade really happens, what are the real bottleneck crossing borders. So that comes to a new initiatives, I think also led by ADB, called Carrick Build, for debottlenecking the cross-border facilities. I understand that there will be a forthcoming facility focusing on different countries, like the bordering locations. And for that, AIB is very, very interested in participating in. Maybe my last point is on the design. This is also related to the implementation readiness, the bankability of projects, as well as collaboration of the MDB with our member countries. Essentially, a project can only be mature enough to brought to our MDBs if it's well designed to a international best practice. And what we found is that some of our member countries, they actually have better design capacities, and some of the countries, they do not. So how can we actually facilitate a collaboration even among our member countries on design institutes perspectives? So that could be also a very interesting topic to explore. I know we are all facing a declining supply of concessional finance. However, that means we need to think even deeper and more wisely on how to use this already very scarce resources to put it into somewhere where we can have a bigger multiplier effect. So that's from me. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Runze. You mentioned the project development. Just to give us an idea from your experience, how long does this take? I just want to put it into perspective. Everything is urgent. We want to act now. But how long does it take for you, from your experience, to develop from concept to funding to implementation?
I would say if this is the first of its kind, and for that MDB for a country. So for example, if this is my first logistics park project in China for AIB, it would easily take more than 18 to 24 months to mature a project, to mature a concept, because lots of efforts needs to be put, not only on the technical part. The institutional part is also a big challenge, and people need to spend time with each other to build that trust. However, usually, after the first project, we can be much quicker and shorten that period to 12 to 18 months. But usually 12 months is the best we can do right now. There's a very interesting topic, I think right now across the board on how AI can really help us to facilitate the collaboration between MDBs to make the knowledge dissemination more efficient and quicker. And that will be another topic I would like to hear from my panelists.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to get an idea because if it's everything's urgent, how long does it really take? So, and you heard it, 12 months, 24 months. So it's not fast. So we have to act now. So maybe when we go back to our homes, we think about it, we plan for it, and act. Our next question is for my colleague from ESCAP. You are probably the most exposed to dealings with senior government officials, especially through the UN processes. From your experience, Catherine, what kinds of policy coordination and institutional arrangements that you think are most important for accelerating the sustainable transport investments in the region?
Thank you, Bert, and good morning, everybody. First of all, at the outset, let me congratulate ADB on the launch of this coordination mechanism. I think it's relevant and timely, and just the composition of this panel, I think, shows how complex and widespread that coordination needs to be. So from the point of view of ESCAP, we are the most inclusive intergovernmental platform in the region. We represent 53 member states, 60% of the world population, all the way from Turkey to the Pacific Islands and everything in between. And so, as Bert said correctly, we regularly convene governments, both at the political but also at the technical level, on transport decarbonization. So our work is deliberately upstream, right? So we start with policy making, finding the right regulatory environment for governments. We support member states from the development of their NDCs. We translate those into implementation plans, ideally costed implementation plans. I think you can't start thinking early on enough in the process about what all of this would cost. From the costed implementation plans, we support the development of transport master plans, implementation roadmaps, and then to project pipelines. So by the time the multilateral development banks and other development partners arrive, hopefully with a big bag of money, we've usually tried to lay the groundwork. So why do all these wonderful plans not just become pipelines? It's not just the data, right? Things that we see in discussions with government is usually two key enablers. One, Mark has, I think, explained very eloquently in his introductory remarks, is the government coordination and alignment, right? If you don't have all the key ministries around the table, but also if you don't have that vertical coordination, and normally transport, especially urban transport, electrified transport, is within the area of a city, right? So if you don't have the subnational level, the city on the table, then I think it becomes very challenging. And in order to get that alignment, it's just not, you normally don't get alignment because it's the right thing to do, right? For instance, in my experience discussing with ministries of finance in particular, you need to frame transport decarbonization as an economic enabler, as a resilience tool, and as a tool to build an industrial strategy around. And then you get the ministry on board, right? Mark was rightly talking about concerns related to taxes and what it does to the government budgets. And you have good examples of countries that have understood that. Let me give the example of Thailand, where ESCAP is based. Thailand has, and looking at electric mobility just as a sort of example for the larger problem, Thailand has a strategy called 30 at 30, which means by 2030, the objective is that 30% of all new vehicle registrations should be electric, right? And so they've not just proclaimed that target, they have built an entire industrial strategy around it. They are building up Thailand as a regional EV manufacturing hub, and that includes not only the assembly of the vehicles, but also the manufacturing of the batteries. And they have created an environment where there is both a domestic market for electric mobility, as well as an industrial environment that allows for export within the entire region. And that is how you get your different government ministries on board, because you align their interests, right? So the other enabler that I would say is important and often overlooked by myself and my colleagues too, is to find the people, the focal points within the governments who have the network, the capacity, and the motivation to make this happen. So let me give you one example. We've worked in Tajikistan for a while, and there the policy and the enabling environment is quite clear, is quite established. So that work is behind us. There's on the national level as well as on the level of the city of Dushanbe, the capital. There are policies in place to make it happen. They've started electric mobility transition by transitioning 4,000 taxis to electric. It's done. All 4,000 are now electric. So the next stop was transitioning the diesel buses to electric, right? So there's a domestic manufacturer. Government only has so much money, can only buy 30 buses a year. Guess what? The whole fleet for Dushanbe is 700, so it's not enough, right? So we developed a feasibility study and a financing proposal for a larger amount of buses in the city. And we were very proud with our wonderful financing proposal. And our focal point sent it to the Ministry of Finance, and they rejected it. And so we're like, okay. They said, well, if you can get a grant, that's great. But no MDB was willing to give a grant. They were all saying blended financing, the time of grants is over. I think Sudhir said it, right? The share of grants is decreasing. So if you can get a grant, that's great. Otherwise, we're not going to look at it. So I went back to my focal point and I said, so what are we going to do now? He's like, Katrine, that's the end of it. The Ministry of Finance says, no, I can't overrule them. So then I said, well, maybe you should send it to the office of the president. And the guy thought I was crazy. So, but guess what? He did. And the office of the president said, yes, we're going to do this. So now we have a grant. Actually, no, we have a blended finance from EBRD, and the buses are being procured. So you need to find the people who have the tenacity, the network, and to know how to navigate their own government in order to make this happen. So thank you very much.
That's a very good story, Catherine, and definitely something we can learn from. Perseverance, definitely that's a key. And also looking at working with all the different stakeholders in terms of doing this activity. We will hear more about this kind of observations, maybe if I can say that, on the needs, demands from the developing member countries of ADB, the government officials who are looking for capacity building. Our next panelist is Diane. She has become, as I said, the lead from us on capacity building. And from your experience, Diane, what are some of the most effective approaches in building institutional capacity and readiness for sustainable transport investment development or pipeline development? And also lessons that have emerged from the activities that we have conducted, please.
Thanks, Bert. So to achieve sustainable transport investment, let's say we would need three things. So first, we would need to understand the needs of our member countries, the challenges that they're going through. And then from there, second, we need to design and provide relevant, effective capacity building interventions. And then third, of course, we need to provide appropriate financing to support their sustainable projects. I think e-mobility has been a popular topic among the panel and for this session. So I would also want to dive into that example from the ADB side. For the ADB's e-mobility initiative, so several years ago, we reached out to the DMCs to understand what their needs are in this field, and then the potential intervention that we can contribute to them. After we have understood what their needs are, we have provided support to the DMCs through studies, organized pilot projects, and also capacity building activities. So this led to informing and also inspiring the DMCs and also enhancing their understanding and skills in terms of this initiative. And then also we would want them to learn and have the skills to be able to adapt and also learn from this new technology. So with a better understanding, they were also able to define and design appropriate policies. And then later on, the proposals that they need to provide a project. And then at that time, we were able to identify that they need also concessional financing because there's a high risk in terms of like the risk profile for electric vehicle at that time is also quite high. And then ADB also pursued to secure financing. So later on, we were able to secure the 170 million financing from the Green Climate Fund. So this is an ongoing initiative. And then to support that, we have the e-mobility program. And it deploys investment to 7 DMCs on electric buses. So that's what we are also saying here across all of us, that the coordination also from the different institutions and organizations and also within a country would also lead us to a project that we'll be able to implement together. So maybe we can also see from there the lesson that we can gain from the DMC is to also hear them out, to continue to work with them to determine what their needs are. Because they also know better what is in that area, in that country. And from there, we should be able to design something that will help them. So in ADB, actually, there's a wide range of activities or capacity building activities that we design. So we range from having leadership training programs. So it's not only about the technical capacity of the DMCs, but also about decision making, about leadership. And then we also go on the other side of it. We do capacity building in terms of webinars, trainings, workshops, and on different subsectors as well. And then aside from that, we also do study tours because we want to expose people themselves to what's actually happening so that they can see themselves that it's possible and it's something that can be applied to our country. With that, with witnessing whatever other countries are doing, they can also aim for something that's more advanced and also see what other technologies are available in the country. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dan. That's very good. I just want to point out the 7 countries you mentioned for the GCF, and also having listened to Sudhir mentioning that most of the funding goes to only 10 countries. Now, the GCF, this is the Green Climate Fund, together with the Asian Development Bank. This is a demand-driven initiative. You have to ask for it. If you don't ask for it, you will not get it. And what happened is the countries, the 7 countries, particularly in the Central West Asian countries, Armenia, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and then we have Nepal and Indonesia. Although Indonesia is one of the 10 countries, the 10 favorite countries, right? But the others were not. So there are ways to get funding to support transport investments. And I thought would like to highlight that. But now, Mark, having listened to a country, the UN, a development bank, and also the development banks, if you can share a bit more about your, maybe I should say, reflections on your experience with the D2D and similar initiatives, and what policy lessons are most important for translating the climate ambitions into the implementation of transport projects. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, and I'm very much looking forward to Felipe's point on this, because I think that some of the lead that Latin America has taken in this space is exemplary, and we're certainly learning lessons, and it's a privilege to be able to work there. I'll start off with a little story. I have a friend who is an investment banker, and I asked him, why on earth are you spending all of this money on, packaged up subprime mortgages and so on, hundreds of billions of dollars, and you move it really quickly. I can point to lots of investments in lots of countries that have better returns, and they do better things, and so on. And he said, I have money, I have lots of money, but I need to be able to discover projects quickly and move that money quickly. And one of the problems is that in this space, we've not translated our ambitions into the kinds of projects and finance offers that are easily discoverable by those with funds, number one. And number two, they've not necessarily met with the right kind of quality criteria that you want to be able to release those funds. So we're working with as I mentioned earlier on, we're working with the Turkish government at the minute to try and decipher the space a little bit for countries so that they know exactly what the criteria are to access these kinds of funds. And, we've divided this up into sort of 5 types of funds. The first, and Bert, you pointed to this, the Green Climate Fund as an example, just readiness funding. If countries ask, there is funding. Countries don't necessarily know what to ask for and what kind of commitment must come with it. A presidential commitment, for example, with interministerial coordination to go from ambition through to dedicated projects is something that you would find funding for really quickly via the GCF. Every country has $1 million worth of readiness funds allocated for an ask directly. And then there are other special mechanisms like the one that you were talking about earlier on. And this is not clearly known, but we also have funds for policy-based loans. As soon as the analytics are done and you have sign-off from the various ministries and various other criteria are met, you can go and get access to policy-based loans. Again, large amounts of funding, the 11 billion that I was talking about from these small countries in Latin America, all policy-based loans, and those can be extended. So again, criteria. And then there's funding for project preparation. But you don't go to that project preparation funding until you've done the other upstream pieces of work. And then the concessional de-risking, a small amount of that grant finance can leverage a lot to create the kind of space that crowds in a lot of private investment, which is clearly needed. So I would suggest that maybe the most important thing is to translate ambitions and ideas into very clearly articulated asks that meet the criteria of the funders in a space and place where the funders can see this and say, yes, that's where I would like to go to. I think this explains why we don't see a lot of funding in transport in particular. Meanwhile, there is lots of climate funding available potentially for transport. Sadir, in his excellent work with the outlook and so on, has done some other analysis that points out that something like 80% of the transport policies that are out there could appear in a country's NDCs, so in its climate policies, but don't, which means that 80% of those are missing out on a large swathe of finance that's potentially there. So I'll stop there for the minute. And as I say, very interested in hearing more about some of the Latin American experience, because I think that really hit the nail on the head very nicely, and it's a great example. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Mark mentioned the NDCs, and you keep hearing about these nationally determined contributions. And usually it's across the economy, by various sectors. Transport is one of them. And one of the data to deal focus is how to help the countries in translating those NDCs into a pipeline of projects, but also assessing potential impact on CO2 reductions, getting the financing for it. But let's hear first from Felipe. I think this is, you are also implementing a project of FCDO called RIDE. We will hear more about that. But now, perhaps also some reflections from your side, bringing in the experiences in Latin America, and how do you see these are applicable also to this region, the Asia-Pacific region, in terms of, in helping cities and national governments in generating evidence on designing, prioritizing, financing climate-aligned policies. Felipe, please.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for having me here too. Let me start with RIDE, with the program that we have with FCDO right now. It's a program funded by the UK FCDO. We're working on it with some partners, GIZ, TRL, and why it is relevant for this conversation. This is a program that I really like in the sense it's a research program, but it doesn't stop at generating that knowledge on the research side, but also it's knowledge to be implemented. So the program is looking for doing some partnerships, it's creating community of practice, it's connecting with governments, it's trying to really nail the fact that what we're discussing here, you can create a lot of knowledge, you can have a lot of data, you try to create this cutting edge research, but you really need someone to take it and analyze it and be able to implement it. Because if you allow me to say something, when I was a practitioner, something that I was missing on the other side of the picture was, all right, you write a lot of things, but you don't really see the reality of how things are happening here. And we cannot forget that we live in a political world where we have 4 years or 6 years of tenures of the mayors or the presidents, and they need to deliver something in that, within that period. And then also they need to plan for the future, but delivering something is quite important. So making sure that the research, the data that we produce is possible to be used by someone in the governments, it's absolutely important. So RIDE tries to do that work. We have 5 main topics where we work. One is transport, logistics, and trade. The other one is productive, efficient urban transport, transport decarbonization, adaptation and resilience, and then cross-cutting teams that include gender inclusion, safety, digitalization, and finally mobilizing private infrastructure. Right now, we have different projects across the region. We mainly are working in Asia and Africa in this specific program, developing on what I just mentioned, gender. We have a project on heat, one specific on financing roads related to what we just mentioned here, and to give you an example of this project, finding the finance to be able to build the roads in a climate, with a climate perspective, it is important. But then also, it is important to understand that nowadays we are talking more about adaptation rather than mitigation. Both are important, of course, but adaptation is it's a strong thing to do. So the question is, all right, how do we connect these two worlds? The adaptation, the financing, and the implementation side of it. So this research specifically is trying to click into that specific field and understand what the risk is and how those risks I can connect to the implementation side of the picture to make sure, again, that the projects really happen on the ground, which is probably what we, as working in this field, need to really push forward. And I cannot not talk about the electromobility, of course, here, and maybe just because of all the panel has talked about the electromobility, and I think it's, of course, absolutely relevant. And to go to the Latin American example, when I was hearing Catherine talking about your example, it's exactly the same story in Bogota. I was the person who managed, with a whole big team, of course, to bring the electric buses to Bogota, 1,485 electric buses. And the discussions were exactly these ones that we're having here. We knew from the technical side we needed the electric buses. There were no electric buses in the world outside China in that moment. We were the biggest, the city with the biggest amount of electric buses at some point in the world outside China. So you can imagine, with no experiences, all what you need is actually good data. So you can really put your signature, your own name into these contracts and say, okay, I'm moving forward with this. But you need, of course, this communication and this really good relationship with the other secretaries in the city, the financing, the environmental, the women secretary. Everyone needs to be involved so you understand what the real needs are, not only from the perspective of the transport, that interdisciplinarity that you were talking about. It's absolutely important and relevant. So that way you can move forward and make sure that things happen. But if you ask me, what really unlocked everything that happened in Bogota was political will. The very first day of the mandate of Claudia Lopez, the mayor who did this, she put us in a room with all the secretaries and she said, this is gonna happen. The question is how you will make it to happen, not if it's going to happen. So we need to push that way. And in that way, we had a mandate already, and we started working with all the secretaries at the same time and making sure that things were moving along. And then after you, of course, find a way to finance it, how many years you need, understand from the technical side if that's possible or not, to put the buses in place and so on. Let me finish just with this. Some of the projects that I started back in 2016, when I started working in the public sector in Bogota, today are not yet delivered, 10 years after or 11 years after. That it's an important message because, again, I'm not a politician, but of course I had the the mandate to deliver something within the 4 years. I last 7 years in the government, but the 4 years that the tenure is. But there are some that will last longer than that. So how you manage to balance between the short term, the medium term, and the long term in order to be able to provide something to the city that really lasts. And there is where policy and regulation takes a very strong position into this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felipe. I really appreciate hearing the stories that you have. We don't have a lot of time. Maybe we will not go to the second round of questions because I want to give an opportunity for the participants also to raise their questions. If you have any, please feel free to use the app or just raise your hands. I think microphones are available, please. And you can direct the questions to any of our panelists. Yes, sir.
Thank you to all our good panelists in front. I'm Gibson from the Department of Works in Papua New Guinea. My question is directed to Diana. I've been listening about that climate fund being only given to 7 or 10 different countries within Asia only. What about the Pacific? Are we neglected in this space? I would like to hear from you, what is the process of ADB helping us to become a direct access entity? I've been struggling to get that accreditation process to be qualified as a DAE member so that we can have access to GCF and GF in country. So I would like to hear and love to hear where ADB can support development partners like us in PNG. Thank you.
Thank you. So the process that we took is like what I mentioned a while ago. So we determined the needs of the different countries, and at that time, it's more of like a sign up if you're ready to, join the bandwagon. But I do understand, like what you said, that there are more and more countries getting more interested now on this. Seeing also, I think, the experience from other countries who pioneered it. And what we would suggest is, of course, we welcome everyone, but just for this specific program that we are implementing, currently it's limited for that 7 countries. But we're not saying that we won't do anything with the Pacific countries. So of course, like what we are also saying, always please reach out to our colleagues from the resident mission and also our region focal here and the country focal here. So similar to what Runcia said, we also have a country focal for specific countries within the transport sector. And they would be very willing to design a program that would also be appropriate for PNG. And at the same time from our team, so we are from the emerging areas team, and that's also what we look into, like the future, what are the future projects. And this is also one good way of telling us, like, this is what you need. And I think that's also what our focal will also be doing, like reach out to you further to determine better what are the needs that you have. And from there, we'll be able to hopefully also give a support or response that would be appropriate for both of the parties. So nothing concrete at the moment, of course, but this is a good start. Like what we said, you need to let us also know what you need so that we'll be able to respond better to what you need. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. The GCF and the GEF membership or registrations, usually the ministries of environment are the ones that are leading this. We can also provide information to you later on.
Sorry, just an additional comment to that. We've approached our Ministry of Environment, even our Climate Change Department back in country. What they are advising us is that you have to work with an accredited entity, which is like in our case ADB, to help us go through the process of DAE. And I've been a thematic lead in my country in this discussion on climate, Article 7 and 8. So I'm familiar with the discussion so far. But having that discussion to access this financing on the GCF is a bit challenged. Because none of, in PNG, there's non-accredited entity. So how do we become a DAE when there is none in country who is an accredited entity? And ADB being already an accredited entity, how can you help the country? That's exactly what I'm asking.
Okay, no, thank you very much, sir. We can include it in the planned assistance of CCG to PNG, and we can discuss this later on further. Please, if you have any other questions from the participants. Maybe I can ask Catherine first on, was supposed to be our second question, but it's a generic question that talks about what do you think of like priorities for a coordination mechanism. But now, having listened to the speakers, can you tell us more about your insights on like what kind of coordination mechanism do we need from the MDB side, but also now hearing maybe also at the country level? If you can share some insights on what potential elements are needed for such coordination mechanism.
Thank you. I would just say two things. So first of all, the coordination needs to be in both directions. So it needs to be across ministries, but also across levels of government, right? If something happens just on the national level and doesn't go down to the region, the province, or the city, then you will have no impact on the ground. And the second one, I think Felipe said it all, is at the end of the day, it's political will, right? And that's a combination of, honestly, your willingness to set priorities in that space, your willingness to use political capital to push these projects through, but also the willingness to take the risk, because you're 100% right, especially larger infrastructure projects don't materialize within one electoral cycle, right? And it's my personal hypothesis, when we saw the data, that the investment in rail, which is exactly the most sustainable mode of transport of all, and that investment is coming down more and more, right? And my hypothesis, one of the reasons is because you can't bring a rail project to fruition within one electoral cycle. It takes at least two. So you never reap the benefits of what you sow. So I'd say that's probably the two big challenges. In the end, if you have a policymaker, if you have a government that's willing to make this a priority, it can be done.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Catherine. One more question. Perhaps this is the last I would like to pose to Felipe. This is our second scripted question. And this talks about how do gaps in transport data, knowledge, institutional capacities, policy development, investment, how can these tools be made more useful for decision makers? But my question is, so not the scripted one, maybe talking from your experience, I think you raised a lot of points. You convinced there was a political support. So how do we make use, or how did you make use of the data, the research analysis? How did you present it to the decision maker or the mayor in order for her to appreciate, maybe not only the mayor, but also the other decision makers, to appreciate the results and make the decisions and the implementation?
I think the transport sector has an advantage compared to other sectors, and it's that we can talk about so many things depending on who is your counterpart, right? You can approach the problem from the climate perspective, you can approach it from the economic development perspective, you can approach it from many different perspectives. So the most important here is to know who is sitting in front of you and know how to approach it and what kind of data you are needing in order to be able to move forward. But the first thing, if I may say, when you, and I already mentioned this, when you use your name that you're using and you have to sign, those that have worked in the government knows this, when you have to use your own name, the only real goodwill that we all have, your name, you really need to inform yourself in the right way. So all what I asked my team was, okay, what if the batteries fail when we have the buses running in the city? And the answer was, all I want you to make sure that to protect me is that you analyze it from the technical side, that you ask the OEMs how they're going to react if that's the problem, what the risks are, like trying to make sure that you analyze the whole map so you have all the information. That way you are strong enough to go to others and explain from all these different perspectives what you want to achieve and what you want to have. So yeah, that's probably why the usage of data is so important, because that way it gives you the strength and the confidence to move forward and to have the conversations. That's why I think that what Mark presented on data to deal is so relevant, because yeah, there is an order on how you organize a project, how you make that, build that confidence when you are in the government so you can move forward. But again, this is not only about the government, this is about all the institutions that we have. This is about all the global perspective that we're building. So how we have targets that are ambitious enough and we are able to move forward that way. How we come with ideas from other places and bring to our own perspective and we enhance them from there. So just to give an example, we took the work that we did in India, enabled to electrify the buses there, where we work with different states in the country. You know, each state in India is like a different country, is big as a country, and with different cultural things. So we standardized the buses that we're needing there and so on, and we brought that idea to Brazil, and now we're working in Brazil in order to get the finance for electrifying the buses there, but with the idea that we started in India. So that kind of things always help, because you are not building from scratch. You are not inventing the wheel. That's something that also help to build that confidence that you need and to talk to the other stakeholders in the picture.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Please approach Felipe for more questions if you have one. We are over time, I am sorry, but I would like to give the final words to Mr. Solomon from the panel before I hand over to Johanna. Mr. Solomon, please.
Thank you, Bert. I'll make it very short. One of the focus there probably for the coordination mechanism to work better is perhaps to get the political will. Politicians will say, what's the economic benefit, you know, apart from the social safeguards and, you know, the sustainable infrastructure we're trying to build. And I think what we can do is, if all development partners, not just ADB, World Bank, JICA, if we can concentrate our investment in an integrated manner, where if ADB is looking at transport infrastructure, if there's another investment by ADB in the economic space, perhaps within that corridor. And it's something I've heard over the last few days is people are talking about corridor development. It's not just one network of transport, it's about a corridor. What can we get out of the corridor that maximizes the impact, both socially and economically as well? So it goes both ways, and I agree with what our female colleague mentioned, is that it's not just accountability on the side of the development partners in ADB and others, but also in us as well. If we can align everything and say one corridor at a time, I believe the political will be there, as well as achieving the targets of what we are all working towards. Thank you, Bert.
Thank you very much, sir. I think we would like to thank all our panelists very much for your candid and insightful interventions. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Bert. Thank you very much, our participants and our esteemed speakers and panelists for this really interesting session. So we're a bit over time, so we come to the end of the session, but maybe just to draw together, I think the session very well highlighted kind of the importance of stronger coordination between governments, between financiers, development partners, knowledge institutions, and sectors, of course, as we have discussed here, on different levels in that sense as well. The importance of having data, but that's specifically for the purpose of, or kind of purposeful data for using that for creating political will, and for being able to talk the language of different stakeholders for getting their buy-in as well. So we hope also that the coordination mechanism will contribute to this, to these kind of gaps in the needs of coordinating finance in the region. Please come talk to us as well if you're interested to hear more. And yes, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the discussions. We'll see you around here and hope you enjoy the rest of the Transport Forum. So thanks again to our speakers and all the participants. Thank you.
Excellent. I love your stories.
That's
It's
usually
always good to have
these
that.
smaller sessions, usually the fun ones.
Yeah, no.